Hey everybody, Eric Renier here with Philippe J. Fournier for this week's episode of The Numbers. Philippe, we're in the final stretch of the Ontario election campaign. We've got some crazy federal polls coming out. Lots to discuss this week, but first off, how are you doing?
I'm doing very well, Eric. Thanks for asking. Indeed, very busy times. I don't know if you noticed, but the Conservatives, it's all over, right? They should just fold. They should just say, you know what?
I saw that. Yeah,
it was a good run, but no. But seriously, I think what struck me most this week, before we dive into the numbers, the overreaction to polling fluctuations for me is always very, very funny. And it's normal. It's okay. It's politics. People are emotional sometimes. But let's take a breather. Let's breathe through your nose and relax. Let's talk about the last week's numbers, Eric. Where do you want to start today?
We'll start with those federal numbers that have Liberals feeling optimistic, hopeful for the first time in years. Which I guess maybe is why they're overcorrecting a little bit. They just have been so down in the dumps. They're just getting all of these numbers that are boosting their moods. But we got a number of polls that came out, including when we recorded last week. We were discussing some of the new polls that came out, had the Liberals and the Conservatives close margin. And then a couple hours after we recorded, and actually I think before we could post it, there was an Abacus poll that came out that had the Conservatives leading by 19 points. So we'll get into that. So the polls that we had coming out of the last week, we had a Nanos poll. The usual Nanos poll had a 7-point lead for the Conservatives. There was a Leger poll that had an 8-point lead for the Conservatives. We saw another Ecos poll with a 5-point lead for the Conservatives. We also had a Main Street poll. I have a bit more of an issue with this because it says, would you vote for the Liberals with a new leader? Yeah. To me, that is too much of a hypothetical. But anyway, this poll had the Conservatives only had by 3 points. So we're seeing that gap is close among most of the polls, single digits. There was that Abacus one with still a 19-point lead. So how are you taking these numbers that we've seen over the last week?
Well, the Abacus numbers, the numbers themselves did not really struck me as so impressive. What was interesting is that even though, yes, the Liberals went up in the Abacus polling, I think they went from 22 to 27. That's a significant 5-point jump. But Abacus was the only firm that saw the Conservatives go up as well, right? So whereas we have seen most firms, like we stated the example of Leger that had the Conservatives at 47 in January, down to 40, 41 now, but not going up. But for me, that's one data point in the cloud of data points. And so it's interesting, but I think in an environment where the Conservatives are in the low 40s, you will get the odd 46. And so I don't discard automatically a poll because it's different, and whichever party is different. It enters the fray and is one of the data points. But we have now consecutive polls that show the Liberals at or above 30% nationally. And we had not seen that all throughout 2024. Remember, Eric, in 2023, we even had an over-under. Will the Liberals get one poll with 30% or more? And we were like, well, I don't know. I think we both said no, and it didn't happen. And then suddenly we're in February, and the Liberals returned at 30% or a little more. So a dramatic turnaround, I think it's fair to say. But we are such in flux right now. Resigning prime minister, a leadership race, still lots of turmoil with what's happening in the United States. I think it would be prudent for all involved, including you and I, to not draw hasty conclusions. I know that's boring. I realize that. It's not a hot take that people want to hear, but I think it's the safest one, isn't it?
I think so. But what I find interesting about these polls that we've been seeing is that these are not, again, hypothetical polls with Mark Carney inserted into it. There were some of those, and we'll talk about that in a bit. But these are, again, like the Leger poll does say, Justin Trudeau's Liberal Party, right? Yeah. We saw from the Angus Reid Institute put out a poll over the last week that had Trudeau's approval ratings the highest they've been, I think, in 2 years or something like that. So there does seem to be that the floor for the Liberals has increased. That the baseline for the Liberals has increased, because all of the polls that we see, the hypothetical leadership polls, you substitute in Karina Gould, you substitute in even Ruby Dalla, people who aren't very well known,
Yeah.
And the Liberals are still polling a high, much higher than they were at the beginning of January. So I do think that the baseline for the Liberals has moved forward. So that does give a more solid base to whoever takes over. So it isn't just a leadership honeymoon.
Yeah.
There has been an improvement in the Liberals' underlying popularity over the last month or so. And that does mean that I think they're a little bit more solid than they would have been if the hypothetical polls were giving Carney, 38, 39%, and the Trudeau polls were still giving the Liberals 20. I think you would say, okay, something is not right there. But the difference is not too big. So it does suggest to me that the Liberals do have an actual chance, that it isn't just a polling mirage that is going to suddenly evaporate as soon as the reality sets in.
To your point, the Angus Reid poll did not have a generic ballot. No. It did have also Mark Carney and Chrystia Freeland tested as Liberal leader. But we have to remember the previous Angus Reid poll, right? The Angus Reid Institute fielded during the holidays. It was between Christmas and New Year's. And you remember that number, Eric? The Liberals were at 16%. The NDP was at 21%. And so right now, this poll from the Angus Reid Institute, if you put Miss Freeland in there, the Liberals are 29%. So 29 is pretty bad historically for the Liberals, but that's 13 more points than the Liberals were at in the same polling firm in December. And again, as you said, when you put Carney in there, 37%. What also I find interesting is that the fluctuations, the potential for growth for Mark Carney here kind of makes sense in the regionals. Because we're not seeing a Liberal surge in Alberta or Saskatchewan. We're seeing Atlantic Canada, we're seeing some in Quebec, Ontario, BC. We're seeing those surges compared to pre-leadership race polls in the places where the Liberals historically do better and where they draw enough seats for victory in the past 3 elections. So there is some logic to it, but also, a lot of people in Canada do not know who Mark Carney is, or they just have a vague idea of the guy, right? He's a kind of a boring, generic Liberal candidate. I think he has a great resume, but I don't think many voters know about his resume that much, aside from he was a governor of Bank of Canada. So it will be very interesting to see which way the needle moves when, let's say, he does become leader next month. And then he is more tested. He goes into more media appearances in Canada, not just international. And so this will be the real test, because right now, it doesn't say, please people, stop saying that Mark Carney would win a majority government. Stop saying that. The polls are interesting. The numbers are interesting. They don't show that. They suggest that Canadians are at least listening. They're open-minded. Can you imagine, Eric, if those polls, those hypotheticals, they show, the Liberals would go from 20 to 22. that means that Canadians are tuned out and they're not even listening. This tells me that they're listening at least. Liberals could still blow it after this. So, yeah.
Oh, of course they could.
Oh, yes, they could.
If you look at the polls that that I listed out, so you got 4 of the 5 have the Conservatives between 39 and 41%.
Yeah.
Abacus has them at 46%. So maybe we can think that the 39 to 40 is a bit on the lower side, and maybe they're a little bit higher than that. Anyway, Stephen Harper had 39.6% of the vote in 2011 when he won a majority government. The Conservatives are polling still well. They're getting more voters supporting them right now than in the last election. So the fact that the Liberals have moved forward doesn't mean that the Conservatives have moved back. It just means that they've moved back from the very high numbers that they had at the end of last year. But, you just said that these numbers don't mean that Mark Carney would win a majority government. And I agree that it's not a given or like a guarantee or anything like that. But when you have the Conservatives at 40% and the Liberals getting close to 40%, you start wondering what the outcome is. And the only reason that can happen is because of the NDP. And I want to talk about the NDP for a little bit.
Go ahead. I do too, but go ahead. Yeah.
Okay, so these 5 polls, 3 of them have the NDP at 15%.
Yeah.
2 of them have them at 11%. And the Carney hypothetical polls push the NDP down to 10 or 9%.
Yeah.
The NDP is in serious, serious trouble.
Yeah.
I find it absolutely remarkable, gobsmacking, whatever you want, that the NDP that was cruising along at 18 to 20% for the last few years,
Yeah.
a new leader comes for the Liberals, and all of a sudden, boom, they lose nearly half of their support in some of these polls.
Yeah.
When we were talking about Jagmeet Singh and, why the NDP hasn't tried to get rid of him, I would often say that, look, they're at 18, 20% historical level of support. That's a pretty good result for the NDP.
Yeah.
I think it shows that 18 to 20% was based on a house of cards, that as soon as something else came up, the NDP is now being knocked down to like where it should be with the kind of leadership they've had over the last few years.
How many seats would that be, Eric? I mean, I know you update regularly the poll tracker. What's your average right now for the NDP?
I think I have them down to 17.
17 seats?
Yeah, but I have them over still 15%. Once I put in some of these polls, they're going to drop down below 15. I don't know. I haven't run the numbers yet. I'm not sure. At this point, it's about whoever they got on the ballot, if they themselves can survive. Because if they're down to 12, 13%, they could be wiped out.
Listen, my last update on Sunday, I had the NDP at 11 seats. So just below the official party threshold, right? 11 seats. And the numbers got worse this week. So in the next update, next Sunday, I don't know, I still haven't run the numbers, but it's going down. And we saw multiple polls, especially if you put Mark Carney in there, single digits for the NDP in Ontario. And I know there's not that many seats in Ontario. I think right now there's 5, right? There are 6. But that means no gains whatsoever, right? And in BC, third place in BC, behind the Conservatives, obviously, who are in first, and now in most polls behind the Liberals. That's a lot of seats in Metro Vancouver that suddenly could flip. You remember when we talked about maybe gains for the NDP in Quebec, or especially in Montreal? Well, that's over. Remember when we said the NDP could take Halifax? Maybe it would be a loss for the Liberals. Which leads me to this question. Perhaps you're not done on the NDP, but right now, we know there's supposed to be a by-election in Halifax. Could Mark Carney take it? I think he would win in Halifax right now.
I think right now, yeah. Like, when you look at that Leger poll, even before you mention Mark Carney, the Liberals are at 52% in Atlantic Canada. Yeah. Small sample, but we've now seen a number of polls where the Liberals are in first place in Atlantic Canada. And even in my average, which is a little bit of a lagging one, I have the Liberals and the Conservatives tied in the region. Yeah. I just don't think they're going to have time to have. They have to call that by-election within 2 weeks. Within 2 weeks of today.
Today? I thought it was mid-March.
Oh no, they got to call it by March 2nd. So it's only about 2 weeks away. Not even 2 weeks away. Sorry, that's less than 2 weeks away.
Time flies. Yeah.
But I mean, they're going to call it. But I don't think it's ever going to actually happen. That does raise an interesting question, though, because if they do call it next Sunday, let's say, this Sunday,
what's the procedure? If you drop a writ of a general election during a by-election, the by-election just is canceled, right?
Yeah, it gets kind of wiped out. But there will be actual questions about who's going to run for the Liberals in this. Will they find someone will they find someone who will be the Liberal candidate in Halifax? That they can just put there, or will there be pressure for Mark Carney to actually say he's going to run there? It's actually going to be kind of awkward, but I just don't think it's going to happen because with these kinds of numbers, I think that the Liberals will absolutely go before. I don't see why they would even bother going to the House at this stage because of the NDP. It was all based on whether the NDP would prop up the government one more time. Yeah. If you're the Liberals, you're looking at these numbers. You're saying, I'm going to be propping you up if I prevent an election from happening now. I think the Liberals can take advantage of such a weak NDP right now. Yeah. And make it a one-on-one race with the Conservatives. And if that's what it is, their chances suddenly become a lot better.
How the turntables, right? The famous meme. But seriously, though, because I was thinking about this a few weeks ago. What about Mark Carney could run in Halifax, say that at least he is an MP, he has a seat, he can sit in the House, but wouldn't that just give enough time for the NDP to recuperate, to maybe change leaders, maybe do something dramatic? So you're right. It's still very risky because there is no way you look at these numbers right now and you say the Liberals are the favorite. I'm sorry. The Liberals have a chance now, which they didn't for the longest time. Eric, maybe I'm going further than I should, but could somebody reasonably say that the Liberals are the favorite right now? I still see historically the long-term trends that the Conservatives, it's their election to lose still. It's just that now it's much tighter than it was 2 months ago.
My question is, are they more of a favorite in an April-May election or in a October election?
Yeah.
I think they're more of the favorite in an April-May election than they will be in October. Because
you mean the Liberals?
For the Liberals, yeah. Because I don't think, I agree with you, I don't think they're yet the favorite. But the fact that we're even discussing that we have to discuss, remember, we were assuming that Poilievre was going to be winning 200 plus seats.
Yeah.
He still might.
Yeah.
But the Liberals actually have a chance, and they could risk trying to wait until October. But I think at this stage, I do think that would be a bit of a mistake, because the idea of Mark Carney is helping propel the Liberals forward. The reality of Mark Carney might not be as good, and
well,
and if he becomes prime minister, he'll have a couple months of legislating in the House of Commons. He'll have a record, at least a teeny little bit of a record, but he'll have said no to some things. He'll have said yes to some things.
Yep.
Right now, he's just a fill in the blank of whatever the best you could hope for from him, and that is what I think a lot of people are getting. So, if you had to ask me what the odds I give that the House of Commons does actually return on March 24th, I don't know, 15, 25%. I don't think they do.
I don't think it's that high. Yeah,
yeah.
You're being very generous. I would say 1 in 10. Again, the numbers have turned on a dime in a past month. Perhaps 1 week after Mark Carney is leader and he gives a bad interview, those numbers revert, right?
Yep.
So let's not get ahead of ourselves. But I just wanted to go back to that Angus Street poll. Do you have a favorable, an unfavorable view of Pierre Poilievre, the Conservative leader? 56% unfavorable, 37% favorable. Now, the Angus Street Institute has had Pierre Poilievre in the red ever since he became leader. So in itself, those numbers are not quite surprising. And if you compare those to recent months from the Angus Street Institute, it's still within the margin of error, the perceived margin of error. But they're still the worst numbers for Poilievre since he became leader. 56% unfavorable. So if you go down by region, it was a pretty big sample from the Angus Street Institute. It was over 2,000 cases. Pierre Poilievre has a positive rating in Saskatchewan, in Alberta, and that's it. He's a minus 42 in Quebec. He's a minus 35 in Atlantic Canada. He's a minus 18 in Ontario. So the Conservatives are still the favorite, according to the numbers. But I think the ceiling has come down a little bit. And yes, our 230 seats projections for the Conservatives around Christmas may very well look silly once the election is called and when we look back in a rearview mirror. So, yes, some headwinds for the Conservatives. And I think when you lead by 15, 20, 25 points, I think it's pretty easy to cruise. But now the Conservatives and the leadership will be heavily tested. So when the tough get going, the going gets tough or something like that. Or it's the opposite. So I think we're going to see what the Conservatives are made of right now because we have a race and we didn't 2 months ago.
Yeah. And I'm very curious to see, we're recording this on Thursday. The big hockey game between Canada and the United States is tonight. Curious to see what ads I'm going to see. I'm in Ontario, so I'm assuming I will see some Doug Ford PC ads. But I'm wondering if I'll see any federal ads, because I have started to see some third-party ads attacking Pierre Poilievre. I've seen them now on a few. I don't know if they're
really.
Maybe they're not in French because they're in a third-party group, Protect Canada or something like that.
Okay.
And some of them are pretty tough on Poilievre. So this is the first time I've seen some attack ads on him. And I'm curious what this means going forward and if it will have any impact, because he's been able to cruise without really any public attacks, paid for media, because the Liberals haven't been able to afford it.
Yeah.
So now that we see some third-party characters getting involved, that maybe it balances things out. But once an election starts, that the spending limits start to kick in for those third-party ads. So it could be a bit different. But very curious to see what the ads are that I'm gonna see on the TV tonight, because I'm imagining the audience will be pretty good. And
Yeah, well,
if I was a political party, I'd like to get my ads in front of those eyeballs.
absolutely.
Okay, how about we talk about the Liberal leadership race?
Yeah.
Is it a race? Do you think it's a race?
Well, we had some conflicting data, right?
Yeah.
It looks like Mark Carney should have this in the bag. But yeah, that Main Street poll last week shook my priors, let's say. It was a poll of voting Liberal members, and it had Mark Carney in front, but it was below 50%, and the margin with Chrystia Freeland was not that big. And so that gave me pause. I'm like, okay, so perhaps are we getting fooled because he's getting all these great numbers? But then you have the fundraising number that have been released, Eric. So as reported, I think it was a CBC, was it? So
Well, Elections Canada had him out. Yeah.
Elections Canada, okay. 1.9 million for Mark Carney. Freeland is at 226 grand in fourth place behind Mr. Bayliss and Miss Gould. How is that possible?
There's a weird thing with the numbers. If anybody's listening to the Liberal leadership podcast, Race to Replace, they went over it as well. It's the real answer is that the reporting for Chrystia Freeland's numbers were a little bit out of date because she's only getting wire transfers once a week versus every single day like the other candidates are. So the report was a little bit incomplete. She put out a statement saying that they had raised actually $600,000.
Oh.
But that actually includes maybe an extra week or two of fundraising about 2 weeks, versus Mark Carney, who didn't have that extra little bit because we don't know what he's raised over the last 2 weeks. So my takeaway from this is that what we know is that from the returns, Carney raised $1.9 million up to February 5th. Chrystia Freeland says she's raised $600,000 up to roughly around now, which means that even if we assume that Mark Carney didn't raise a single dollar over the last 15 days, he's outraising Chrystia Freeland 3-1.
Yeah, please. It's not 8-1. It's 3-1.
Yes. Yeah. We're not being completely crushed, but I mean, he's probably raised another million since then, because he's raising about $1 million a week. It seems to me. So you got to follow the money.
Yeah.
The money is often shockingly close to the vote shares of each party.
Because of the cap. It's not somebody gave 1.5 million to Mark Carney, right? There's a 1,750, I think, cap on donations. So that's a lot of people that gave money to the perceived frontrunner.
And it's not just like, I know people are assuming that because he had big banking friends that everybody's plunking down $1,700. His average donation is $170.
Wow.
Freeland's average donation is like 2 or 3 times that. Like, she's getting the big dollars. It's Gould and Carney that are getting more of those small donations.
Yeah.
And that's why both Carney and Gould have more individual donors than Chrystia Freeland does, right? So all of these metrics, which fundraising to me is the best metric for following the leadership race. Time after time after time, it is really very, very close.
Yeah.
I can't see how he's only 8 points up on Freeland when he's out fundraising her, probably 4 or 5-1. Yeah. So I have some. I think I would trust the fundraising numbers here. If you ask me right now, do I think Carney wins on the first ballot? I'm going to say yes.
Yeah, I guess that's the most likely scenario right now, right? Thing is, to be fair to the others, Ms. Dalla, Mr. Bayliss, Mrs. Gould, we're going to get it on the first ballot, 5%, 8%. It's going to be a very small amount. So unless Miss Freeland can pull like a 35 or something on a first ballot, there's only going to be one ballot, right? Mm-hmm. It's going to be interesting. And debates next week, right?
Oh, yeah.
In Montreal. I'm supposed to go. I have my media accreditations. So in French on Monday, in English on Tuesday. I doubt it will change the race that much, because debates usually don't, unless somebody really trips on their own shoelaces, which I think, we're watching this for a potential plane crash. Not to make a bad joke, but so I'm going to be looking forward to that. But if you're asking me right now for the odds, 20-1 for Mr. Carney, 15-1.
Yeah, my question with those debates is, because he is such a perceived front runner, and maybe there is internal data that the other candidates know that it's closer. Yeah, I just don't believe it. But anyway, if the other candidates perceive that Carney is by far the front runner, what do we see from them? Do they say, like, I need to go at him hard because I need to take him down, or do they say, this guy's going to win, I should probably not stab him in the back for use for what was it with Stéphane Dion?
Yeah, I want to be.
You think it's easy to make priorities? I don't know if they want that kind of clip coming out of those debates. But
that's a good.
I'm very curious to see how the French one goes. Carney did an interview on Radio Canada recently. Yeah, it was good. He's got good vocabulary and everything like that, but he's not exactly well equipped for a thrust and parry of a debate. So I guess we'll see how that goes.
The passion is not there, but as you said, the vocabulary is there. But sometimes the thing is, the passion can go each way, right? So we'll see how it goes.
Speaking of passion, Ontario has an election happening.
I heard of it.
Yeah, I think it's on February 27th. Advanced polling is actually opened. I'm very curious to see how many people are going to go trek out to the polls.
I hope they do.
And if you're in Ottawa, you got to still get yourself through the snow.
Yeah.
Shockingly, a lot of the streets aren't even that well plowed. But we have some polls.
Yep. Lots of polls.
Lots of polls, which is what we expect around this time of an election.
Yeah.
And we have a whole bunch of them. What are your general thoughts on all the numbers that we've seen over the last week or so?
You know how I'm always the one to say people do not overreact. These divergences will probably fade away once we get closer to election day, because the amount of undecided voters diminishes as the campaign goes along, usually. But there's a huge chasm right now between Main Street Research, the daily tracker that they have, a 3-day rolling poll, that has the PC at 38, and the latest Léger that has the PC at 48, right?
Yeah, it's a 10-point spread.
That's too much. So if you put the number in the middle, which is a fair estimate, you find Nanos at 44, you find Abacus a bit on the lower end with 41, Palace Data had a brand new poll, 44% PCs. At least they all agreed that the Liberals are doing better than in 2022, the NDP is doing worse, and the PCs are going to win. But the margins of victory could be wildly different if the PCs are in the high 30s or the high 40s. I mean, we're talking about maybe 20 to 25 seats difference for the PCs. So that would be my big takeaway for now. What about you, Eric? Are you seeing something in these numbers that stick out?
Well, just what you said, the difference in margin. We're looking at literally difference of margins of either a 10-point win or a 20-point win. Yeah. Those are both wins. It won't really matter in the end. But one of them is 100 seats, 100 plus seats. The other one is actual official opposition and party status for maybe the Liberals. But if you look at the one thing that I find interesting is that you're right. The PC numbers are kind of all over the place. For the Liberals and the NDP, pretty clear, right? Yeah. All of the polls that we've seen, the Liberals are between 27 and 31%. Yeah. The NDP is between 16 and 21%. So we're looking at only a 5-point kind of variation for the New Democrats and a 4-point one for the Liberals.
That's reasonable.
Yeah, and there's no overlap, right? So the Liberals do seem to be somewhere in the high 20s, which means that they're doing a little bit better than last time. The NDP is probably in the high teens or the very low 20s, which means they're doing worse than last time. And the Liberals would, with these kinds of numbers, be able to win some NDP seats in Toronto, and the PCs should be able to win some NDP seats in Southwest, in the Hamilton, Niagara area. Yeah. So that knocks down the NDP again talking about the NDP being in trouble. Again, the NDP looks like they're in serious trouble in Ontario.
Yeah.
And the real question for me is whether the Liberals can actually find 12, 13, 14 seats with, give or take, 30% of the vote. It could happen, and it probably will, I think. But they could still find themselves with a lot of 38s in seats where the PCs are getting 41.
Yeah, and they could still finish third in the seat count. If the NDP gets 15 seats, which still would represent their caucus being cut in half. It's still massive losses. But as you said, the Liberals could collect second place finishes. And this morning in my update, and of course because of the discrepancy in polls that we just mentioned a minute ago, the uncertainty in the projection is huge. It's a huge bell curve, right? But I have the PCs at 90 seats. And then I have, I think, 15 each for the Liberals and NDP and 2 Greens. So if that's the case, the Liberals would be the official opposition because when in a tie, it's the popular vote that counts. That's a tiebreaker, right? But
it could be. Could be.
That's the rule in Quebec. I thought it was pretty much universal.
It's murky. It's murky. It'll be up to the speaker. The speaker can look and take different precedents. That could be one of them. They could also take the fact that the NDP is the incumbent official opposition, so they get to keep it. I don't think it's a given. If it's a tie, we still don't really know who ends up being the official opposition. Okay. I think it would be up to the speaker.
Wow. Then we know what would happen, right? The speaker would not help the Liberals.
I don't think so.
But imagine the Liberals getting 30% of the vote, maybe 29, 30% of the vote, and barely battling to get official party status. I know in our members, in our Discord, we have, I think, a few fans, you would say, of electoral reform. That's
to put it mildly.
That's something to pull your hair out. I think there's a ceiling for the PCs. I do not see them really win 100 seats anymore. Not if the Liberals get 30% of the vote. Everything would have to fall exactly. All the dominoes would have to line up. So I think the ceiling should be around 95 seats for the PCs, which is that's a lot of seats. Big caucus to handle for Mr. Ford and his team. Perhaps
that's what he wanted.
That's what he wanted, but François Legault wanted that as well, and he won 90 seats. And then you find out that many MNAs thought they deserved to be in cabinet, and they didn't, and they weren't. So we'll see how the PCs handle that. But one thing at a time. Next week is the election.
Yeah. Did you watch the debate?
I kind of watched it. We say en français, en diagonale. You watch it, but your mind is also elsewhere, on my phone, on my work. I had deadlines, writing columns. Those debates usually put me to sleep. They're really important. I'm not diminishing. I'm not as cynical as much, but nobody really impressed me. Did you have any comments about the debate, Eric?
I also wasn't particularly impressed by anybody. I thought Doug Ford was Doug Ford, and he did his usual thing that he does during debates, and that works well for him. I thought Bonnie Crombie was a little bit, she had this tense kind of nervous energy that was a bit uncomfortable. Stiles, to me, performed well. Might have had trouble getting an actual message through. Schreiner, he does his thing when he's in the debates. Yeah. But we have some numbers. We love those. Palestata actually asked people who won the debate. So their most recent poll does have post-debate stuff. It was a really interesting breakdown. Okay, so among the people who said they watched the entire debate, Ford was the winner, 37%. Crombie was second with 22%, and Stiles was third with 16%. Which is kind of like voting intentions, right? Because you take out the undecideds, all this.
Yeah.
But then they asked people who didn't watch the debate, but they watched clips and coverage of it. There, Crombie was the winner with 30%, tied with Ford, I should say, at 29, Stiles at 7. Ooh. So that I find interesting, that the people who watched the debate generally more or less saw their preferred person win. The people who watched the clips and the coverage afterwards thought Crombie did pretty well. Yeah. Which is surprising to me, because I think if you watched the whole debate, you probably had my reaction to Crombie, at least I think you would. But if you only see the best parts, I guess she had the best moments. And she had the best little clippable stuff that she could take and could be used afterwards.
That's a George Costanza moment, right? if you take all my achievements and you condense down to a day, it looks decent. So maybe that's the same thing. If maybe that the entire debate was not that impressive for Ms. Crombie, but if you take only the best parts and put them together into like a minute and a half, maybe it looks good for her. For me, again, that doesn't tell me much aside from the NDP is in trouble. Which we already knew, but it was Schreiner in there because I do not see the number. I didn't 4% Schreiner.
He was, but he didn't seem to get that much of a breakthrough from the debate.
Yeah, there's no green breakthrough in this election, huh? Yeah.
Well, maybe we'll see if they win a third seat, but we'll talk about that actually next week. We'll talk about that in a bit.
We will, absolutely.
Okay, a couple things we'll get through a bit quickly. There is going to be a by-election in Manitoba in the riding of Transcona. Nello Altamare, he passed away. He was an NDP cabinet minister, and they're going to fill that seat now. Transcona, if you remember, it's part of the federal riding, Elmwood-Transcona. The NDP won it by 23 points last time, 58.5 for the New Democrats, 35.5 for the PC, 6 for the Liberals. I guess it'll be a little bit of a test to see if Wab Kinu's post-election honeymoon is still boosting the NDP forward.
Yeah.
But I'm not sure there'll be much more to look at in this riding. But just wanted
it should be a safe NDP pick.
Yeah, just wanted to mark it.
Yeah.
And we also got a poll out of British Columbia, one from Palace Data. 49% for the BC New Democrats, 41% for the BC Conservatives, and 8% for the Greens. Again, pretty much what we kind of expect and not too different from where things were in the last election.
Well, I guess we could say that Léger had a poll, I think, in the second half of January in BC, and it showed basically the same numbers as in the election in the fall. So perhaps the events of the past month, the rally around the flag, the tariff threats, have helped the incumbent, and I think this is a trend we have seen from coast to coast outside of Quebec, that the incumbents are doing okay right now regarding the Trump threats. So good for the NDP, and those numbers would be a big majority for the NDP. I know it's not a big movement in voting intentions, but in terms of seats, that would be a significant win for the NDP. So
good news for the BC NDP and a by-election coming up in Manitoba to test the Manitoba NDP. Last little thing.
Finally, yes.
Did you know that there is another election coming this year? Not Newfoundland and Labrador, although it is coming, but Yukon.
Yukon.
A territorial election is taking place in Yukon. And Yukon, unlike the other two territories, have parties. They have partisan elections.
Yeah.
Right now, the government is Liberal, propped up by the NDP. It's a minority government. And the Yukon Party, which is the Conservative Party there, they changed their name from the PCs back in the early 90s, is the opposition. So there was a poll, an actual poll done by Léger, commissioned by the Yukon Party. They're it's the only polls we've seen. They do one a year.
Yeah.
And the Yukon Party was happy to put it out. They actually put out a little statement. I saw it on their website. 41% for the Yukon Party, 34% for the NDP, and 23% for the Liberals.
Third place.
Now, I know that you're an aficionado of Yukon politics, so give me your take on what's happening there.
It looks like the federal numbers, well, not really the NDP, right? But I was going to say federal numbers from the fall, where the incumbent Liberals, propped up by the NDP, is in trouble facing the Conservatives. This is a narrative that we have heard on the federal level. But I confess, I do not follow territorial politics. I already have too much on my plate. So aside from saying, cool, we have a poll, I cannot in good conscience comment on it because it would not be worth anything. How about you, Eric? You follow territorial politics more than I do, right?
A little bit. But I did find it interesting to see the Liberals still in third place, because it doesn't seem like the territorial Liberals are getting a boost from the federal kind of Liberals, which, you could argue that's what we're seeing in Ontario. And so I guess that'll be something to watch whenever that election takes place. If it is supposed to take place, I think, in the fall. But if we do see that any of the results kind of match what we're expecting federally. Yukon, for me, federally is trending conservative.
Yeah.
So we'll see if we have a matchup between the federal and the territorial results whenever that happens. Okay, Mr. Fournier, you have a quiz, I believe. A little one, you said.
a little quiz for you. I hadn't done it in a few weeks. So, okay, Eric. We are going back in time. The year is 1959.
Okay.
Why 1959? Well, of course, the St. Lawrence Seaway was officially opened.
Of course, yeah.
Jacques Plante, the Montreal Canadiens goaltender, got hit by a puck in the face and was the first one to wear mask protection. We also had the first picture of Earth by the satellite Explorer 6. And also the first successful use of a heart defibrillator. I say successful because we can guess that it was used a few times before and didn't work, right? The USSR sent Luna 3 around the moon and was the first probe to capture pictures from the far side of the moon. As some people may know, when you look at the moon from Earth, you always see the same side because its revolution and its spin are synchronized. So we had the first pictures. And so many of these great things happened. I have a list here, right? Singapore became a self-governing crown colony of Great Britain. Cyprus gained independence. Mattel introduced the Barbie doll. But there was also, in 1959, an Ontario election.
That's what 1959 is most remembered for, yeah.
And not just any Ontario election, but an election where Leslie Frost, the PC premier, won a third straight majority. And he is the last one to do so until perhaps next week. So
Probably
I figured
next week, yeah.
I figured I would give you a little quiz on the 1959 Ontario election. If you go on the writ.ca, people, Eric has a great project in the Every Election Project. Have you gotten to the 1959 Ontario election?
I don't know. When was it?
You don't know?
What time of the year was it?
Oh, I don't.
Oh, now I'm catching you. Look at you, such a pro. I don't know actually if I've done that one. Oh, this is gonna be rough.
So I have 5 questions. They're trivia questions. You have 2 lifelines. First lifeline is a free strike. If you answer wrong, you can have a second shot at it if you want, or you can keep it for a next question. And the second lifeline is you get, if you want, 1 hint at a question.
Okay.
For gold is 5 out of 5, silver is 4, bronze is 3, and as you know, shame is 0, 1, or 2. So here we go.
I'm looking at shame. Okay.
In the 1959 Ontario election, Eric, there were 98 seats in the Ontario legislature. How many seats did the PC win? And I'll give you a plus or minus 3 range. So Leslie Frost, third straight majority. And by the way, it was the 6th consecutive win for the PCs, but the third one with Leslie Frost. There were 98 seats. How many did the PCs win?
I honestly don't have any clue.
Really?
So I'm just going to get... Because, well, okay, first of all, I know that the biggest majorities we've seen were somewhere around like 90 seats, and that was when the Queen's Park, I think, was a little bit bigger. And this wasn't one of those record-breaking ones, so if there was only that many seats, they were probably somewhere around 55.
Is that your final answer?
That is my final answer, locked in.
So you get a strike because that's wrong. It's not within range. So do you want to use your strike here? Do you want to have the hint, or you just want to pass? And by the way, the election was on June 11th.
I will just take the loss on this one.
You'll take the loss? Okay.
Yep.
Leslie Frost won 71 seats.
Oh, okay.
So the acceptable range was from 68 to 74. Okay. You're 0 for 1. Question number 2. Well, okay. 4 different parties won seats in this election. What are they?
4 different parties.
Yes.
1959. Okay, well, there would have been the PCs, there would have been the Liberals, there would have been the CCF.
That's right. You got 3.
And what would be the 4th one? Yeah, I don't think Social Credit ever won a seat in Ontario.
They had 5 candidates, but it got 0.09% of the vote, so it wasn't...
I don't know, was it a Liberal Labour candidate?
It was a Liberal Labour candidate, that one. Good job. That's a nice pull. And you did not use your lifelines. It was a Liberal Labour, and I had his name written down. Albert Wren.
Oh, of course, yeah.
Of course, yeah. Him, yeah.
Like those guys, I think he would have caucused with the Liberals. It's just that
he did.
Yeah,
yes.
okay.
Okay. Eric, number 3. After this election, who was the opposition leader? And of which party?
1959. I don't think it was CCF, because I think that their better years were in the 40s, not in the 50s. So I think it would have been the Liberals. 1959. Oh, God. I don't know. Here, I'll take a hint, because I think I probably have heard of him.
Okay. The hint is in 2 parts.
Okay.
It is the Liberals.
Okay.
So you're correct about that. And his first name is John. That reduces the field, right?
Yeah. John, Jacob, no. John. Wintermeyer?
Oh my God. Nice pull. That is exactly it.
Yes.
John Wintermeyer won 21 seats for the Liberals in this election, form official opposition, 36% of the vote. The PC's at 46. So it wasn't a blowout as much.
Yeah.
In a seat count it was, but not in a vote count.
I had that name somewhere buried in my brain. And it
Wow, beautiful. You're 2 out of 3 doing well, and you still have 1 lifeline. You have a free strike. Okay. A format we have used before. Eric, rainbow or sweep? Ottawa West, Ottawa South, and Ottawa East. And for those who don't listen to us very often, I'm asking basically, did the same party win all 3 of these neighboring ridings, or was it 3 different parties? And if in either case, you have to tell me which party won which seats. So Ottawa West, Ottawa South, Ottawa East. Was it a rainbow or was it a sweep?
I'm going to say, I have no idea, but I'm going to say it was a rainbow. And I will say that Ottawa West went CCF, Ottawa East went Liberal, and Ottawa South went PC.
You have a strike. Would you like to try again?
I will take the strike. You'll
take the strike. So you keep your strike for next time.
Yeah.
Okay.
No. I'm going to use it. I'm going to use my strike.
All right. You have another guess. Go ahead.
That's what I have to try it again.
That's it.
I will say then it was a PC sweep.
And it was a PC sweep.
Okay.
There you go. The PCs swept Ottawa. That tells you how well they did in this election. So I find that interesting. Okay, so you're what, 3 out of 4?
I'm out of shame.
Yeah. You got bronze locked up, but you're out of lifelines.
Yeah.
So, last question, number 5. Which of these seats was not won by the CCF? Oshawa, Edmonton, Hamilton East. Which of these seats was not won by the CCF? And of course, there's only one.
Yeah. I'm going to guess that they won Hamilton East. They usually did well in Hamilton. I think that you're trying to trick me. So I'm thinking that they did win Eglinton and they didn't win Oshawa.
The riding of Oshawa back then stretched from Pickering to Ajax to Oshawa, and it was won by the CCF. Sorry. The answer was Eglinton. It was won by the PCs in Toronto. So, my friend, you have bronze, and I think it was a hard-fought bronze.
That was a tough one.
So, congratulations, Eric. You did well.
Thank you. Okay, number of the week. Let me go first. Mine is a simple one. We've already talked about it. It is 11. It is the percentage that the NDP got in that Léger poll. I think that there's a lot of focus on the idea that the Conservatives have dropped a little bit, that the Liberals are surging. But the NDP being at these numbers, we have not seen these numbers since before the 2019 election. So they are in real trouble. And I've seen some NDPers, I think it was Don Davies on Twitter, saying that they were at 13% in April 2011, and they ended up winning 103 seats. That's true.
Yeah.
They were also at 13% a few months before the 93 election, and they won 9 seats. So you know what? It goes both ways, and right now the trends are not looking positive for the NDP. And I think that is an under-discussed kind of story right now, just how much trouble they seem to be in right now.
I don't disagree, and I'm looking at the Léger poll for my number of the week. It's related to yours. With Mark Carney as Liberal leader, the Liberals are 18 points in front in Quebec. 43% for the Liberals, 25% for the Bloc. And that's not the first... I mean, the first time I saw this with the Quebec-only poll from Léger about 2 weeks ago, yeah, your eyebrows raise a little bit. But then we had other polling that shows the same trend, that Mark Carney has an appeal in Francophone Quebec. I'm not sure why, but it's working. And the NDP, by the way, in Quebec, 4% in that poll. So, yeah, big trouble ahead for the Orange team, unless they find a way to turn it around. Hey, maybe they could have a leadership race. They have time, right?
Hey, why not? Apparently you can do it pretty fast, so we'll see. All right, so that'll be it for this week's episode of The Numbers. You can head to thenumberspod.ca to listen to the mailbag. We got a lot of questions. We got some on the Ontario election.
Oh, yeah.
More on the Conservatives polling, the federal polling. And we are next week going to have our special episode. This is a members-only episode. We are going to be focusing on the Ontario election. We're not exactly sure what the topic will be, but it will be on the Ontario election. I'm thinking we'll probably do a deep dive on the map, but we're going to see. So if you want to listen to that, you want to listen to the mailbag, go to thenumberspod.ca and join us. Philippe, I'm looking forward to the next week. It's going to be a busy one, and we're going to have some different timeline with our episodes next week. We're going to have one on Wednesday, as just ahead of the Ontario election, and then we're planning to have a Ontario election results episode Friday morning. So it's going to be a busy week, and I'm looking forward to it.
Absolutely, and thank you, Eric. Thank you, everybody. Merci beaucoup, tout le monde. Thanks for your support. Head to the mailbag right now. Become a member to listen to it. You'll see it's good stuff.